I hope I haven't had too much of this. Hi, my name is Gary Hodges. I'm the creator of Dinosaurs vs. Marsbots, and I wrote a comic book. Welcome back, everybody. Video 4. This one is going to be on collecting references to prepare for drawing. Finally, we're finally getting into drawing. Thank God. Why did I even go through this step? Well, okay, here's like the simple two-part answer. First, I had a lot of trepidation taking on a project this big and doing this much drawing and drawing so many different kinds of things, especially things that I don't normally draw. I mean, I have an art background, and I'm not the best artist in the world. I'm not the worst. I'm a reasonably good artist, but I've never done a comic, and I had a sense, and we'll get more into this later. I had a sense of what I wanted it to look like, and I wasn't super confident doing that. It wasn't completely in my comfort zone. Other artists probably find other ways to feel good or get their confidence going before they take on a project. For me, it's resources. I want a library of images. I want all sorts of things to look at just to feel comfortable. I don't know if that's a leftover from like my studio fine art days, like where you always had a still life or a model or something to look at just to kind of as your little touch base, like okay, and like you'd work, and what's that look like? All right. Like I like that. It gives me a lot of. It's a security blanket. It's a Dumbo's feather. It's whatever. Is it metaphor or analogy? I think those are metaphors. Again, if I'm wrong, I'll edit this part out and nobody will ever know it. So that's number one. Number two was why not use references? I think through a lot of my youth and even into my teens, I just imagined, I looked at all the artists I admired, and I just imagined that they were like the artist equivalent of Rain Man, where when they would be drawing something, whether it was a figure or, a car or a landscape or whatever they were drawing, that they just knew they had this perfect visual memory of what those things look like and could just recreate them. And that's why they were artists. And that's why you're just a schlub. And I just operated under that assumption. And so through a lot of actually when I was trying to get good at drawing when I was a kid and when I was a teenager, I just imagined like I have to have this like all this reference stuff in my head to make my drawing kung fu righteous. I need to, like, if someone says like draw me a foot, I need to just be able to do. You mean like this? And it's perfect. Like that's what I thought a great artist does. There are people who can do that. There are great, talented people out there who are just not only naturally talented, but have put in a lot of work and that is married together into something where they can do that on the spot. What I didn't realize until much later, and probably too late because I beat myself up as an artist for too long, is that is a weirdo unicorn kind of artist. Most artists use references. That's how you get it to the next level. Once I realized that and gave myself permission to do that, now it's just like a part of my process. Like it would feel weird not to do it, and it would almost feel like I was half-assing it if I didn't do that. On that note, and maybe this is snooty, I apologize if it is, but I always sort of wrinkle my nose when I hear somebody say like drawing hands are hard. You hear people say that all the time. Hands are hard. And I always just think like, unless, you're a pirate, you have two excellent references for hands at all times, no matter where you are, no matter where you're drawing. I mean, what's hard is like drawing a horse running. Like that's not, I don't have that right here to look at. What's hard is drawing, going from my work, like a pancreas. Hands, draw that right here. Look at it. Draw that. I'm sorry. I got a little hot there. I apologize. I lost my temper. Baby, you know I'm a hothead. By the way, this video, you're going to start to see like a closer glimpse than ever of the rat maze that is my brain and how far down the rabbit hole, I went with this, like the visual precision of the comic. Harkening back to my answer to the last question in the last video, on one hand, I think my sort of weird obsessive thought about what something should look like lends to the individuality of my work. On the other, it's a nightmare to be me. There were two broad categories of references that I pulled together for DvsM 1975. Still life and models. Models being people. Still life was actually the much easier of the two. All it required is thinking about, what do I need to draw? What do I need to look at? And that, for this, it was pretty straightforward. First, there's all the period aspects of it. Set in 1975. You have two men in black. Men in black, suits. What do suits look like in 1975? That's a good example of something like, I don't just know that. I'm not a savant. Like, I need to look at examples. One guy's wearing sunglasses. I need to get a reference of sunglasses. They're going to be driving a 1974 Dodge Monaco. That was a little bit of a pain in the ass at first, but then there was a breakthrough. So I was looking up lots of pictures of Dodge Monacos online, collecting a bunch on my Pinterest board, but none of them were exactly the views I needed to draw two guys in a car rolling down the street from a particular angle, whatever. The dash, or where a driver's shoulders would line up if they're sitting in the seat and stuff like that, like, this doesn't help me with that. So there was a period where I was even looking on Craigslist, like, to see if someone was selling one, where I could pay somebody $50 just to go by and photograph the hell out of it, and photograph myself sitting behind the wheel and everything, just so I, like, could collect a bunch of references. Couldn't find anybody selling one. I was even asking just random friends, like, hey, you wouldn't happen to know anybody who, for some reason, has a 74 Monaco. Finally, after all this hand-wringing about it, it occurred to me, like, wait a minute, a 74 Monaco is heavily featured in a movie. Like, throughout the movie, you see every single view of it, inside and out. The Blues Brothers.
What the hell is this? This was a bargain.
I picked it up at the Mount Prospect City Police auction last spring. It's an old Mount Prospect police car. They were practically giving them away.
The Bluesmobile is a 74 Dodge Monaco. So I went and bought Blues Brothers and just frame captured the hell out of it, going through any time I saw a view that was, like, helpful to me. I mean, in a way, it was kind of funny, and it didn't even occur to me. I mean, it's two guys in black suits in a Dodge Monaco. It was super helpful to figure out, like, all right, so where are Dan Aykroyd's shoulders? Where does his head line up? And how tall is he? And how tall is he compared to my guy? And, all right, this works. They do all this driving, and they show up at a house. What does a house in Wilcox, Arizona in 1975 look like? Well, that's another thing you can do. It's real easy to go to Zillow, search Wilcox, show me houses that were built in the 60s, and now you have all sorts of visual examples of, like, what those houses look like. So once you're at the house and they're going through the house, I want the layout to look right, and I want it to be plausible. This is where my day job creeps in, where I occasionally do things like create virtual 3D models of crime scenes. I want this house they're going to feel like a real house. And when they're in it, I want it to feel like a real place, which meant I had to come up with a floor plan, which meant I had to figure it out. And then I went a step further, and I even used SketchUp to create a little set. Like, this is what the interior of the house looks like. So then when I'm drawing panels in the house, I can set the camera, the virtual camera, wherever I think the view is for that panel, and I can see, like, what you would see from that angle. This is stuff that nobody would care about but me, but I'm the boss, so we're going to do this. We're going to go all the way. Photos are great. Blues Brothers is great. But any chance I had to get the actual physical thing in my possession, I wanted that. Like, that's always going to be the best. Of course, the men in black, and maybe other people in the story, are armed. I figure that young man in black is carrying a 1911. This was $7 on Amazon. It's actually remarkably accurate to the real thing. It has, like, little, I don't have it loaded right now. You should never keep a loaded gun in the house. But it had, like, little plastic bullets, and it will fire them. Like, all the action works. So that's all the still life, basically. That's all just the things. But the hardest thing of all to draw is people. And that was actually the thing I had the most trepidation about starting this project, was having to draw human beings in almost every single frame, talking and emoting and doing physical things, and over and over and over for over a relatively long comic. So I started casting all the characters in the comic I was trying to find humans to stand in for. They didn't have to necessarily look like the actual characters, because it wasn't about recreating somebody. It was just for me to look at a person doing the things I imagined the character doing and see all the little things again, like, because I'm not a savant, that I would forget about. Like, how exactly does your body move in that way? Where does your face wrinkle when you make that face? All those little things that I think add a little bit to a drawing of a person, and that kind of helps sell it. The big star of the production was the person I cast as Young Man in Black. It was Jeremy. Jeremy, as far as I know, he's never modeled before, he's never set for photos before, and he certainly has never had, a weird hipster doofus like me saying, like, all right, now make a face like you're not so sure. Okay, now look excited. Now do this. Now look over, like, just telling him to do all these random things. As if that isn't awkward enough, it was at the Phoenix Public Library, and their study rooms there the walls are all glass, so there's no privacy. Everybody sees what you're doing in there. And I'm having him get in, make these weird poses and weird faces, and like, okay, now like act like you're firing the Dayglow 1911, whatever. And yet, he knocked it out of the park. He was so great. He had no self-consciousness at all. Like, he absolutely just, like, whatever I told him to do, not only did he do it, but he would, like, nail it. He was a natural. It was crazy. There are characters later in the comic, when you get to the house, that I cast with my good friend up in Prescott, Luke, and his son, Will. They played in very, very critical parts. While Jeremy doesn't look a ton like, he looks a little bit like Young Man in Black. They could be like maybe brothers or something. He doesn't look a ton like him. Luke looks almost exactly like the character I cast him as, because it's a relatively short part, and I thought it'd be fun. Like, this is basically Luke. Will also looks a lot like the character in it, though I changed his hair and stuff like that. For the role of Old Man in Black, I cast myself. And I don't remember, I think because I didn't want to ask any more people to do it. and that there were certain things where it's like, I can do this. I stood in for the aliens as well. I got like a little tripod, and I got one of the little clickers where I could set up the camera and look at it, and from a distance click it, and I could be in whatever pose I needed to be in. It was also great when I was going through the drawing and realized that I had missed a picture. That I needed, Jeremy or Luke or Will or whoever to, like, I really should have asked them to stand like this, and I forgot to. Or the picture I did get of them for a particular panel, I realized, like, that's not going to work. Or after the fact, I'm changing that panel. I realized, like, yeah, no, I want to go in a different direction with this, and so now I don't have a reference. I was always able, just like, okay, well, I got to put on the coat again and set up the camera and do some selfies. It was kind of fun. They're not flattering pictures. Like, you hate looking at them, but they're helpful. Okay, that's all I want to talk about this time. I just want to show you all the visual references. Next video is going to be about actually drawing. For real, finally, we get to draw. But it is also the longest part of the process. The absolute longest part of the process. But we'll get to that. Before we get to that, we're going to talk Q&A. We got more questions. We got great questions, and I'm going to try and get through them. Question number 1. I've gotten this a couple times. What are your inspirations or influences? There are a couple variations of this question, but they're all sort of like that. That is a huge question. I'm not going to spend a bunch of time on it. just because, I mean, that's going to be an hour-long video. I'm going to just do two categories of influences. One is like comics I loved. We're going to stick to comics. I'm not going to talk about all my influences, like movies and music and video games and everything else I've ever seen. When it comes to comics, comics I loved, and then sorts of style, like visual style I like. In terms of comics I loved, to me, probably the all-time greatest, as for my money, is League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, Volume 2. This is almost like World War Z, which we talked about what feels like a million years ago. If you've only ever seen the movie of League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, the movie is so bad, and the comics are so good, especially in my opinion, like the first two. But to me, the second one is amazing. Dark Knight Returns, I mean, everybody says that, but it's great. Of course, Watchmen, another one that everybody says. V for Vendetta. As a kid, I was not a huge superhero comic fan. I mean, I liked Spider-Man, I liked the Hulk and stuff like that, but I really kind of liked G.I. Joe. G.I. Joe was my comic, and one of my favorites of all time was, again, it might be a little silly, it might be a little random, but was G.I. Joe Silent Interlude. This is the so-called silent comic. There is absolutely no dialogue. There's not even any text, with the exception of like a couple points you might see like a monitor or something that has text on it. But there's no spoken dialogue. There's no like onomatopoeias. There's no narrator text. There's none of it. It might be the first comic I read. Whenever I read this, I was probably in grammar school, where it really kind of it woke me up to the possibilities of the medium. That there are lots of interesting ways you can tell a story in comic form that had never even occurred to me. I mean, every comic I had encountered up until that point was just very by the numbers. It was just very rote, and it was everything you expect when you picture, like, you know, just a generic comic in your head. And this was the first one I was like, well, this is really different, and it works, and that's kind of intriguing. There are so many others. And as soon as I cut this together, I'm going to think of 18 other comics I should have mentioned. But those are just like some highlights. In terms of artists and their work and the sort of style I wanted to shoot for when I was doing the comic, I'm gonna go through a list, and I'll show you examples like over me talking so you can get a feel. And very quickly you'll see, like, I see the consistent theme. My background, the kind of studio art that I loved the most, the kind of drawing that I loved the most is pretty old school. It's pencil and pen and ink. Like, I love line quality. I love the starkness of black and white. I like working with limitations. I like to see how someone put something together with limited tool sets. I think it's also why I'm kind of into pixel art. Like, it's fascinating to me. I like the idea of having to make something with not everything you might want, and there's no chance you're going to recreate this photorealistically, so you have to figure out how to use these tools cleverly. I follow a lot of artists on Instagram and Facebook, and they'll post their ink, and I'll be like, that looks badass. And then like a day later, they're like, here's the color version, and I have to admit, I'm kind of like I liked it better before. I like everything about it before. It's a bummer too, because you see more and more artists, people I've followed for a long time, like who do comics or comic strips or comic books or whatever, where they've done black and white forever, and then like they'll do this post one day that's reading between the lines. I interpret as, look man, I tried to hold the line as long as I could, but my readers want color and I need readers, so I'm switching to color. And it breaks my heart. It breaks my heart that so much of the public can look at black and white and view it as unfinished. Because it's not. It is its own thing. And to me, calling black and white unfinished because it hasn't been colored is like calling an oil painting unfinished because you haven't turned it into a sculpture. Like, it's no. This is a thing. This is its own thing. You need to appreciate it for what it is. Man, I mean, I know this is all very tilting at windmills, but when I set out to do my comic, I decided, like, I'm going to do it the way I love. And what I love black and white. I'm going to do black and white. So that's what I did. So examples of artists that I like, that to me, like, they share that sort of sensibility. Of course, like, everyone thinks of Frank Miller and Sin City. Like, that's a great example of, like, you don't color that. That doesn't need to be colored. It's exactly right. Other ones, I'm going to blow through these. Mike Mignola. He does color stuff. His color stuff is great, and it's fine. But I really especially like his black and white stuff. Frank Frazetta's ink stuff. I mean, he's done a lot of paintings, and I love his paintings, and I love his color, but I also really love his ink work. Bernie Wrightson, of course. If you've not seen, I mean, there are a million great examples of his work, but the one that just blew my mind when I first saw it, and I still have a copy, was his illustrations for Frankenstein. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Frank Cho, you know, he gets a lot of crap because of how he draws women and how he likes to sort of poke at people by how he draws women. Setting all that aside, if you just look at his ink work, he's a phenomenal inker. Like, and his sense, he's one of these sort of savants where, as far as I know, he's not using live models. Like, he's sitting, it seems like if you follow him, he's just sitting in hotel rooms cranking this stuff out, and it's phenomenal. It's really good work. Jim Steranko is another one. Al Williamson, that would be also an example of someone that I wasn't trying to copy, but it was that sort of look I had in my head when I was doing DvsM 1975. Same with Hal Foster. Hal Foster's Prince Valiant was another one I had in my head when I was thinking, like, what do I kind of want this to look like? I want it to look classic. I want it to look clean. I want it to look, it's a period comic, and I want it to look a little period. I want it to almost look like maybe this could have come out in 1975. I want it to look a little old school. I want it to look a little classic. You know, the old school is underrated. You should appreciate the old school. So this one actually just arrived. I saw it this morning. Coincidentally, it's from Jeremy. Jeremy, the stand-in for Young Man in Black. And he asked an excellent question that's also kind of perfect for this video. Were you apprehensive / reluctant to ask for help in the making of Dinosaurs DvsM? Great question. I had to think about this a little bit. Actually, no. I was apprehensive about every other part of it. Asking people for help made me accountable. It made me feel an external pressure, not a bad one, a good one, to follow through. It's one thing to say, like, I'm just going to hide in my cabin and write my manifesto, and no one will even know what I'm working on, and if I never finish, like, who cares? Like, no one will ever know. And that kind of gives you an out. It kind of gives you an escape hatch if you decide, like, this is too hard, or it's taking too long, or, I don't know, I want to play video games, or whatever the thing is. If instead you tell everyone, like, I'm working on a comic, hey, do you want to help me with my comic? Do you want to read over a draft? Do you want to stand for some pictures? Do you want to do this? Do you want to do that? It makes you sort of accountable. It would be, at some point, almost impossible to go back to all of them 6 months later when they say, like, hey, how's the comic coming? And you say, like, I got over it. I decided I wasn't going to do that anymore. It's like, I mean, like, especially in Jeremy's case, it's like, you know, I stood in Phoenix Public Library and let you take ridiculous pictures of me for an hour and you're over it? Like, no, you're doing the comic. Maybe it wasn't difficult or stressful or whatever for me because I was lucky enough to have people in my life who were really supportive. Like, I would go to people and it was always very hat in hand. I would go to people and say, like, hey, would you want to maybe read over, like, proofread my comic? You don't have to. It's okay. It's totally cool. You know what? I'm sorry I asked. Forget it. Like, it was very much like, if you could, kind sir. And I was lucky where everyone was like, absolutely. No, I would love to read it. Like, let me read it. It was great and surprising and affirming and all sorts of other things to see, like, the support and where it came from. Came from surprising places sometimes. So, anyway, good question. Thank you for asking it. And by the way, thank you very much, Jeremy. You did a very great favor for me, and I appreciate it. Also, everybody else who helped. There is a thank you page of course, in the front of the comic, but it's sort of in universe. It's sort of like a leaked document of the government talking about known associates to the author. So it's like all these people who seem to be instrumental in like aiding and abetting Gary Hodges, and they're the people who were most helpful to me in this process. Lots of people were helpful. It's not an exhaustive list. It's just the people who especially, like, they had a major contribution. They posed for photos. They read drafts. They looked over my work as it was being done. Like, the people who really were instrumental. It's such a cliche thing, but like, would it have gotten done without them? I don't know. Maybe, but not in the form it's in, and certainly not as good. That's all I've got today. I talked for a long time recording this, but I am going to do my best to shave it down into a reasonable, or at least similar length as the other videos. What can you do? Next time we're going to be drawing. Next time you're going to see a lot of comic. I'll see you then.
Crazy, I'm crazy for feeling so lonely. I'm crazy, crazy for feeling